Fitzgerald. I want to again thank everyone for joining us. I really appreciate the time you take in this kind of development. That's really important for us to communicate what we're doing and what ultimately you will be the leaders on for all of us in this program. So appreciate your time. I don't have any announcements to make. There's any administrative announcements we're making or anything, Whitney. You may have heard the recording is on, so we are underway, and this will be available for review in a few days from now when we get that all worked out. But in the meantime, I'd like to turn over to our experts here, Peter and Bill.
This is Bill Fitzgerald. Hi everyone. I'm going to go first. Try and just go over, I don't know, some points, kind of scattered topics and details. Peter's going to come in later on and have the pleasure of going over nutrient management with you. So I'm just going to cover some of the more items that are coming up. Okay, back. Apparently I clicked something I wasn't supposed to click. I have straightened out. So here's a quick outline of what we're going to go over. Like I said, I'm going to cover a few of these first two items, and then Peter will take the nutrient management. So I guess the first point is, hopefully you've seen this link goes by email. I think Marcy sent this out. This is a dedicated web page that we have for the pilots. It is not searchable on Google or anything like that, so it's just dedicated to those who received the link. This covers a lot of the basic material everybody needs access to. So we've got things like that feedback in February. I think most received this, and if not, it's on the website. Any future bulletins or any future materials that we have, which I think we're going to be probably coming out with a bulletin here fairly soon. So keep an eye on that website. I want to talk about field verification and documentation. Some of the points I'll go over when you're going to the field soon. I think weather should be allowing for that soon. So first point up there is when you go out there, make that the conservation practices that the producers indicated that they have are actually there, they're in place, they're functioning. Grass waterways are in water. It's not, running down arrows on the ends of the grass waterways, but actually reaching them. If they said there's mulch, you should be seeing residue, things of that nature. If you're looking at doing any new practices, go out, determine need for those. We've all heard the term more times than we want to hear research concern. There it is again. Well, make that there is actually a legitimate need for resource or practices, and hopefully we can schedule and get new practice on the ground as a result of the program. We need to verify compliance. When people are signing the application, they're self-certifying that they're in compliance with all of our laws, and mean that they're there. Filters in place. I don't want anybody getting certification when they don't have their filter strips on streams and wetlands and lakes. One of the things probably to get yourself narrowed down and focus is make a good thorough review of the aerial imagery before you go anywhere. You can, if you've got a field, you can determine where you really need to look and narrow that work down by just go through Google Maps or Bing Maps. Documentation. Hopefully you're making, like Con 6 notes or just, scribe what have you, but kind of document some of that you're seeing, some of the conversations that you're having with applicants. If you have to make a judgment call, this is a good place to document what your right now was. there will be some of that stuff that happens. We're kind of fighting, and we get into lots of gray areas, and as long as you have good rationale for making the judgments that you do, is the place to put it. When you're out in the field, obviously, some of those, if it's just your cell phone or digital camera, something to document, especially if you see something that might come up in the future. If you're saying somebody is not eligible because of some ephemeral gully erosion that they have to address, then it's good to take a photo of that, have that in a record. And all of this documentation, I'm hoping that they're keeping the field folder there. Keep this record in there so that when it comes to check, there's spot the contract participants that we have some documentation to refer to. I want to go in and do some of this field physical factors. These come up. There's been some questions on how people are doing this. I know people are doing it different ways, and mine, as long as there's good rationale behind what you're doing. I know some people like EFH2 to determine slopes, and there's other methods. How do I go to like the internet from here? Okay. All right. So one of the methods that I was going to go over quick. Technical issues here. Here we go. I think Whitney is here to save me from everything. Web soil survey is a good way to turn to. I'm not going to get too caught up in this. I think most everybody is familiar with web soil survey and how to use it. Coming up last year. So anyway.
Not for slope. Do you use it for slope? What do you use for slope?
Is there a question?
Yeah, you question out there? Asking about slope.
Oh. Sorry, I just got to mute our phone. We're just talking amongst us.
Okay. This is actually I want this to be a conversation. Okay.
Oh.
Let's do a real quick. We'll just kind of go into Minnesota. Not anybody. This might be kind of slow. Hopefully you're seeing it as well over there. Yeah, I was going to point out, yes, you could use it for slope if you wanted to use it for slope. Kind of the one indication I was going to, or use that I would go over. Real quick here, Jackson. Be kind of slow to really demonstrate on here because, but I'll try it and do a slope, and then we'll can just kind of assume that the same for other things. Let's draw of interest quick. Draw an area of interest. This is your field. The things that Peter and I have been talking about when you're doing some conservation practices, we kind of want to make sure that all of the conservation practices, they're going to be limited to one field. I'll probably touch on that here a little bit later on. That and go to our Explorer. soil qualities here. Representative slope. So, a couple things that they both really work just as well. Dominant condition, weighted average. Similar. Dominant condition is basically just going to take the dominant, if you have like a soil type on here that's a complex soil, it's just going to use the dominant soil type within complex, and it's going to ignore the inclusions. Words will include the inclusions. This is probably the most method to do, and then you could just do a rating. Be hopefully not just in future an online tool, and it's going to do the math for us. But up to now, we don't get the math, so we're getting. So we're taking the splitting, and it's giving acres and a percentage. So in this case, we can kind of look at this. This is down in Jackson County. It's flat. We're almost this is 0 to 2%, 1 to 3, 1 to 2. You can look at this right off the bat and say, okay, it's the 2% or less. You don't really need to do the math on this, but if you want to be thorough, you can come in here. You can you can multiply your acres times the rating, and then divide back the sum by the acres, and you'll get a weighted average. And, you can go in there and just do the math. In this case, just a visual look at that tells you, you have 4% of this is a 0.8% slope. So this is actually flat land. And that's kind of the way it works with most of the physical features. You pretty much kind of just take that visual on this. If it's K factor or the B or the hydrologic group, you can pretty much just kind of make that visual observation and know which of those drop-down boxes you're choosing. It gets into a gray area. Unfortunately, Web Soil Survey is not doing the math for us now, or when the new line version comes out, it'll be doing that for us. This would be the go at that time. So that's Web Soil Survey. Let me slope. You can kind of. The group is also underneath this tab. Erosion features is where you find that K factor, use the whole soil one, and again, dominant condition, not the dominant component, but the dominant condition. That way it'll kind of lull all that stuff together. It's more representative of the field as a whole. Another place you can actually go to are the soil reports and the soil erosion, under the Russell II related attributes. If not, do hydrologic group, give you those acres. So you have to kind of refer back to what are those dominant soil types out there. But it does at least bunch some together with K and the hydrologic group.
Hey, Bill, a second.
Yep. Good.
On the K factor, you had discussed if you're doing it by the inches, the 0.
Yeah. Yep. I'll go back to the soil properties here and pull that up.
In case someone doesn't do it that way.
K factor. K factor, I think we're just looking at, you can just do the surface layer, because I think mess around with this, you've got to go down to like below 6 inches or something like that to where it ever really changes this. So just surface pretty going to work just fine. Down condition, you don't really need to put a cut on there, and you just use a surface. So we look at this and compare and contrast if you put a depth to that. For everything right there is a 0.24 rating, except for the end. And you just change that. You wanted to do a depth range of, say, 0 to 6 inches. Oh, I got centimeters. All right, that's not very much, is it? Okay, we'll change it to change it to inches. Again, nothing changes. So surface, pretty easiest way to go with, I think, on that is just run the surface condition. And questions on the K factor?
Yeah.
Yep.
Do you want us to print up on the corner where it says printable version, the page, so that it's a documentation, or is that not required? Because I've been printing every one.
I do kind of documentation of whatever method you're using. Print this. This is the stuff where you could probably start just kind of, maybe some of your fields. I know down here, Jackson County, most of these fields are probably going to be pretty similar. But if you go about, fields that vary, then you need to do separate fields. But in this, right there, it's obvious here you're dealing with that 0.24. So I think everybody's pretty familiar with web soil survey. It's, as long as you have good, consistent methodologies that are going to be representative of what's out there. Sometimes the soil survey is not reflective of what a field actually looks like, and maybe we want to go and find a different version or method. So what do we do here?
Click on it.
Just click on it? Okay. Anybody seen this one before? I mean, most of you guys are in an NRCS or a service center. You've got access to LiDAR, but this is a cool little tool that's available. And go on here. As you go in, and then you get towards, once you get to a certain extent, then the topo lines are going to start coming up. So we're at 8 footers here, and then we get into the 10 foot, and get in enough, you get 2 foot topo lines, and you can bring up of imagery, and then tool here. You can, you can do this, and you can free a line, and it'll actually kind of show you a profile if you want to be perpendicular to that. So then it gives you the actual elevation profile. So if you don't access anything else, like Tim down there, maybe this will work for you to actually go in and get an accurate reflection of what kind of the actual slope we're dealing with in a field. So that's a nice little tool to actually be able to pull sometimes. So any on the field physics factors? On the field physical factors is the vegetative cover, and I'm pretty sure everybody's had an introduction to this, but basically the way this was explained, grain, basically this is soybean column here is for fragile residue, so it's soybeans, legumes, if you've got field weeds or something like that. this corn and small grain, anything that's got lignin that's going to hold and provide residue that's going to persist. And just a kind of a multiplicative factor. So you start out at 100% residue. After harvest, you're going to lose 90%. Be at a 90 to 95%. So you got 90% residue after harvest. So if it's no-till, they've got 90% residue as you grew the winter, and gradually you're to have some kind of seasonal breakdown over decomposition. So by the time the year rolls around, you're down 80%. So any of these factors comes in, you start taking more after to that. So somebody is a chisel plower, they're going to have that 50 to 70% or 60 to 80% residue, and then they're going to have like odor per winter decomposition, so lose another, going to be at 80% of that. So you might 40% residue instead of, so I'm a little familiar with that. Shows a good example right at the bottom. This is for that monthly residue cover. Any questions there? Okay. Conservation practices. There's questions that come up on the conservation practices. I'm going to go over this. One thing I want to mention is we're trying to track any of changes that happen as a result of the program. This is practices that are either installed or existing practices. So if there's anything out there, just we're in toolkit. You're going to down all of those different situations, the fund group, when it's planned. Try and give us some notes to know if it's an existing practice, if it's a planned practice, and also do the same for management. So, if, for instance, somebody's running 50% over on their BMPs and they decide they're going to go to 2%, just kind of some notes in the box here so we can kind of track this. And when that next generation of the tool comes out, we're going to have a method of tracking the practices a little better, so that we can kind of show that hopefully we're accomplishing some things with this program. Other notes. Terraces. Okay, so terraces have been mentioned. They're not on that list of practices. Go ahead and include that under the water and sediment control basins. They're designed the same, so go ahead and include those there. Conservation cover is a choice that's available under conservation practices. We had discussions on where this really comes in. If somebody's got a 160-acre field and they've got 2 acres general CRP at the top of the hill that doesn't affect anything other than that 2 acres, I would give them credit for the conservation cover. But if it's a CRP wetland, an FWP or CP23 that's getting a good water, go ahead and give them the cover under this conservation cover. Or even if it's obvious whole field CRP situation, or if it's in pasture, this is probably where you could possibly go in here. Fields, this comes up in the Red River Valley, up in Whiskey Creek. They use field windbreaks for water quality, keep sediment from blowing into the ditches. So if you're in a situation where you do have water quality benefits coming from a field windbreak, you could go and take that credit and put it under I would suggest conservation cover. There's like some filtering benefits. You could probably go like a field border that has a little higher level of credit. I'd mentioned before, I know there's lumping of fields that are going on when running assessments just for time efficiency, and that's great. But just keeping that can only be for like management if they're doing, the same kind of crop rotations, same kind of fertilizer and tillage. But conservation practices come in; those are relevant to that field only, not kind of lump fields. If there's conservation practice in one field, it's not going to benefit something all the way. The subject of open intakes has come up. If there are open intakes that are associated with conservation practice, wasps and grape staves, things like that, we definitely don't want you to penalize people for having a conservation practice on the ground. So it's, if they engineer those things to put in the green water quality intakes, that's great, but realize, these are engineered practices and have that water off in 24 to 36 hours. So no penalty for having open intakes associated with those. I think everything. Is there any other questions on conservation practices or the other things that I've gone over?
One question.
Yep.
Example, when we click on cover crops on conservation practices, through Equip, typically they sign up for 1 year of cover crops. But for the Ag Certainty tool, if we click on cover crops, does that mean they're going to cover crops for 10 years on that same field? Or how does that work? What's your guys' theory behind it?
You're only dealing with 1 year when you do it. So let's say they're only going to do it 1 year. For 1 year with a cover crop, you run it for a year without a cover crop. Probably standard scenario is, if like a rotation, they're going to do the cover crop for one of the grain, the soybean year, and when they get soybeans off early, they couldn't then probably cover up, or maybe they're coming in after silage. So it's probably going to be one of those situations, and so if they wanted that credit for the entire certainty period, they would have to do it for either every year in that crop.
Got it. Okay.
Yep. Anything else? Topic. So ask your questions now.
This is Gillitzer here, down in St. Paul. I'm going to get real intimate with nutrient management. So chime in with your questions. Basically, so we'll go through the nitrogen application rate, phosphorus application rate, timing, source placement, all that good stuff. The basic formula we're taking is step one, find the BMP practices, which is not always easy, and hopefully I'll point you in those directions. Then compare those practices to the actual or planned practices in the certification record and compare and score. One note here, and this was well segued in with Matt's question, is it may undergo a variety of scenarios under the contract period. It's fundamentally different, like if they're adding cover crops versus not. Both is include them in contract, and they're in the producer's toolkit. So fundamentally different is like cover crops and no cover crops. Non-fundamentally different is like variable fertilizer rates. So like necessarily as certifiers care if our clients are putting on 140 versus 165 pounds, as long as it's within one of our categories. So that is the key thing there. So nutrient. So the first one we'll go through the nitrogen application rate. Helpful. If you guys already have these, which I'm sure we'll call this one on the left there. Can you guys see my mouse? Can you see my mouse? Yes? Good enough. Nutrient management tables. That's the green one. That's just mainly for corn, but there's other neat stuff on too. More is this document right here. Here's where you can get it, the website, and that is on more background on fertilizing corn. These are two important documents that you guys should have, and we can get you some if you don't. Is the red book. We're on those. Those are all the fertilizer recs for agronomic crops in Minnesota. And then for folks who have canning vegetables or fruit, Carl Rosen put out the nutrient management for commercial fruit and veggie crops in Minnesota, and that's also available. So when we're talking about nitrogen application rates, BMPs, these four documents are where we can find them. Okay, so the first thing we got to find these things. So here is the green guide, and let's just look at a example. This is corn on highly productive soils. So depending upon your soil type, you have table 18 here is for highly productive soils. This is most good corn ground or irrigated ground. We have moderate productivity. So it's any coarse soil with more than 3% organic matter, and we have table 20 here. This is coarse soils with less than 3% organic matter. And information you need to know is, as you got, is the crop price and the fertilizer price. So for that is DNT Prograins or the Progressive Farm website. They have like up-to-date pricing information for Minnesota. So right now, for example, we're looking at, just look at this last week, we got anhydrous at 40 cents a pound and corn in some areas going for $4.75. So our ratio there is 0.9, and so we're going to be looking in this red zone right here. This is really productive ground, so we're on table 18, and let's say we're corn on corn. Our acceptable range here is 120 to 165. So when you do math, technically up at this 165 per acre. In the soil nitrate test, which some folks are possibly in Wis Creek, they're in a fall nitrate test, or they're using the spring nitrate test. There is in the you'll find this formula on the lower part of your screen right there. So the nutrient recommendations are the value in table 18 for corn, so 165 minus your soil nitrate test minus 60% essentially of your soil nitrate test. So if you're using that resolution of recommendations, your BMP rate there is going to be 144 pounds per acre of N. So again, check out the documents, and they'll tell you if they're using soil nitrate. I guess is the bottom line. Out of corn, let's say we have a small grain like barley in western Minnesota. There you can see in the graph the counties that soil nitrate tests are used. We have a different formula here, and again, this is in the red book, but it's basically the expected yield. So take whatever 10-year average times 1.5 minus their soil nitrate test minus their legume credit. So this table here is presented in the barley section, but you can see if you previously grew, let's say soybeans, you have to subtract a further 20 pounds of N per acre in fertilizer recommendation. So for this barley, where the nitrate test is used and found to be about 35 pounds of N as residual, recommendation there, the BMP recommendation there is 80 pounds of N. So the next step is determining what is the actual rate. Okay, we're just listening to what the farmer is saying, what the producer is saying, and determining, kind of interpreting it and comparing it to the BMP. So what we got to look at here is what's the commercial fertilizer rate plus credits, plus if we soil nitrate test, what do we as residual? The one thing here I want to point out is to not count N that is already figured into the recommended rate from step 1. So we wouldn't, if we were doing barley again, we wouldn't want to count the legume credit if we had one because it's already incorporated into the DMP. So just watch your math there. You guys all are this and just one there. We'll do one simple example. So for folks who are using, all commercial fertilizers and no legumes or manure in the rotation, so just taking, let's say, 180 pounds of as anhydrous ammonia in a corn soy rotation. Your work is done. Now you guys can watch videos while I go into the manure part. And Mark Lefebvre, if you're there, please feel free to correct me or jump in here. But let's at a more complex example. Here we have a 6-year rotation in dairy country, 3 years of alfalfa, followed by 3 years of corn. We have legume credits to consider. We have manure credits to consider from the current and the previous year, and also maybe we're doing a little bit of a spring plant. So look here at year number 5 and determine what is our total N rate that was applied that year. Going to green sheet, if you don't have any better information, more higher resolution information, we can see that our second year N credit for alfalfa moderate stand is about 50 pounds of N. When our credits, we look over at what I call the blue sheet, which I haven't, that is the manure management sheet, it's the other laminated sheet. And the formula here is how much did you apply, and then correct for our storage and our availability factors. So we lose them in storage, right? We have denitrification, it volatilizes, we lose it through those processes, and then depending upon how we're applying it, and table 4 there, we also only a certain portion is plant available that year. So this example, we're either table 3 or our lab test, we figure that we got about 10 pounds per ton of solid manure. Maybe this is back, and we're applying 10 tons. So we got real simple math, 100 pounds of N. Lose some of it in the manure pack to volatilization and denitrification. So we lose about 30% there. So now really we only have 70%. And then table 4 shows that in that second year only about 25% of that 70% is available. So again, our second year manure credit for our example here is about 18 pounds of N. Do the same thing for our current year. So look at maybe this year we're injecting dairy slurry. We're applying, let's say 6,000 gallons dairy slurry. So, we're applying about 186 pounds of N. We're losing some in storage, 20% loss in storage, and then we go find out because injected it right away, we're gaining 50% that cropping year. So at about 74 pounds of N for our first year. You can see we got our legume. Now we figured out our 2 years of our manure credit and our commercial. We applied some liquid pre-plant in the spring for some green up, and we got a total of about 180 pounds of N. So that's how it works, and thank you for bearing with me, folks who do this every day. So our recommended rate, if you can recall from 8 slides ago, is 165 pounds. They're about 15 pounds over about 9%. There's our mathematical calculation there, and so this particular field would get us 7. Any questions on that? Again, this will be up online. You can hear me drone on again, but it's all there as a just trying to get us all on the same page.
Peter, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay, this is Tim Gillitzer. On that scenario you did, how would the first year work out for you?
Sure.
I mean, just to go through the details, but my question is, if the second year was within percent, is the first year over? Because
good point. In this particular one, more complex, I'm going to have to run every single one of those. And you're really good at this. This is all going to be different if you think about it. Here, a grader, this corn is getting a different nitrogen credit from that legume. 100 pounds per acre is available. Your manure rate and your pre-plant rate will likely also be lower, or different rather, because you're applying a different manure type and a different rate because you have a different nitrogen credit. So in this situation, you're probably going to run corn year 1, year 2, year 3, and then maybe a representative alfalfa year.
Sure. And Mark, is this working out? I mean, I'm just kind of curious on how that, from a standard accounting practices, does this work out for them? And maybe he's not on the line. So.
Yeah. CAD videos. I told him.
Oh, he can do CAD videos. Yeah, sure. But I can talk to him.
You know?
Yes, we can.
Aerial is a thing that I guess that I would have would be most of the time we use the lowest ratio when we have manure, which in effect allow for the higher rate just in case the wet whatever doesn't allow for, fast enough mineralization. So for manure, then you're allowed up to the 180 pounds of N corn.
Which
5.
Oh, you mean the 180 for crop value?
That's usually what we default to when manure is figured in for N credits.
Okay.
Just so it gives you a little more slim or whatever you want to call it, a little more in case the weather doesn't have mineralization when you really need it. And like last year, early season.
Sure. So is it saying that not as many pounds of N might be available
from the manure? So it allows for a higher rate, and you still wouldn't be over. And that's kind of what MPCA uses for their maximum rates for N.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Mark. You're 100% right. That's in the document. Because really, and you can justify that not only because it's in the bulletin, and that's gospel or whatever, but it also, you could that your price is 1 penny, you know what I mean? Because it's free, it's something to. So yes, thank you for pointing that out.
The only other thing I would comment on is I usually don't use the store loss because if we have a manure sample, then we know what it is, what was put on.
So you don't use these default ratios; you just go right to the sample.
Unless we don't have a manure sample from the guy. So that's the only other thing that I noticed that you might do a little bit differently.
Sure. So in our area, we have hog manure instead of dairy. Can you have bulletin recommendation to go to the 0.05? Okay.
Following soybeans, you're at you gotta be on the right table there too. Then you'll be a max of 140 pounds of N per acre.
Sure.
Yep.
With the .05.
Yes.
Thanks.
Thank you. Move on to timing, source, and placement. These are, again, are the easier ones. So you know about the green, another green. We have all this aquamarine, possibly. So these are aquamarine guides, and you have depending on what county you're in, you're going to have different guides. And you see these all right here at this website or your tool there, embedded in there. You know this. So we have recommended practices, and this is for our commercial, for acceptable and not recommended. And you're taking is what are we actually doing on the landscape, or what do we plan to do? Let's score it. So for example, using our alfalfa corn application, we're applying a little bit of fertilizer as pre-plant. So we're doing it in the spring into more moist soil. We're incorporating it, injecting it. So our placement is a recommended practice. So then we would get the 10 out of 10 or whatever. The fact that we're doing it pre-plant and not side dressing or split applying it for timing and source in this particular situation, you could argue that it would be acceptable but with greater risk. So that over to our scoreboard here, our placement recommended and our source and timing would be acceptable with risk. Okay, so now on to the application rate. So like nitrogen application rate, what the current model is, go to the red book or the white book and find your app and your P application. Here is a table of the just for corn, and so the information you need here is your soil test phosphorus levels and your expected yields. So, for example, if we have corn, we're expected yields of near average about 180 bushels an acre. We're going to use the Bray test because our soil is slightly acidic, and our soil test level is 14 parts per million phosphate. We will, according to these BPs, see a crop response up to about 45 pounds. So then, a simple example. Now we have to look at what we're actually doing. If we're applying as DAP, diammonium, then we're simply looking at our rate, 40 pounds of phosphate. So we are below 45 with our within U of M recommendations and 10. A complex example, again, if you're using manure. So you're using pack, your lab test show that it's like 0.15% phosphate weight. So this is received. You don't do any dry matter calculations. What that works out to is about 3 tons phosphate per ton. You're applying 10 tons per acre. You're at 30 pounds of N. So again, simple. And a bit more complex when you have manure. So with those, we apply up to 45. So U of M, we're within U of M recommendations. Now, I just quit there, but what we're doing now is proposing a change for folks using manure, because we do have a issue, and it is with high soil test P rates, and our current scoring guide doesn't necessarily make those, doesn't necessarily account for those differences. In the next bulletin, which is coming out soon, we'll publish this, but I want to give you guys kind of a sneak peek and for you guys to comment and question before we kind of publish as an alternative to scoring. So high soil test P's. So we have these possibly in eastern Minnesota where we have high native levels, or in prairie regions where we have lots of manure for lots of years, and maybe not enough base to handle that. A smaller producer may not have the land base to handle what they're milking. So the big defense of this is that the capacity of most soils to absorb that P is greater than a kind of corresponding concentration of that P in solution. Okay. So this is a risk to water quality model, and we can kind of just stop there, because if we have good erosion control that are going to prevent P loss to the environment. There is coming out, a lot of them led by folks down in Arkansas, Andrew Arpley and company, and they're looking at this idea of legacy P, so long bound P in the soils as a sink is mobilized as dissolved P and getting to the environment, bypasses all the soil sinks. For example, there's work on high rates of organic C release from soils that prevent the aggregation of colloidal particles. This is transported off-field. So I guess what this means is that we normally bound P that can turn into soluble P and more easily leave the field and run off. So to kind of deal with the risk holistically, most states are, including Minnesota, 35 states nationwide have this idea of a phosphorus index. So this addresses the soluble and sediment-attached P, and also considers the buffering capacity of soils more accurately. So this can kind of be summed up in some overly simplistic graph, possibly, but we have up yield in brown here, where we have a level where we're not going to apply any more phosphate because there's going to be no crop response, and have this kind of idea of this P loss to the environment headline here. We're dealing with nitrate. These would be like directly, more tightly, potentially directly correlated, where as soon as you hit that inflection point, loss goes way up. With phosphorus, because of some of the soil sink and complex chemistry going on there, you have a buffering capacity. And so the idea is there that just because you're applying more P than your crop is going to respond to, doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be lost environment. So what we'd like to do is recognize that and kind of to better align our program with this methodology and incorporate MPCA 70-20 rules, which, if you do manure, you may know. We alternative scoring for manure applied P only. This is P. The other commercial, for phosphate is, for the crop recommendations. And the problem, because it doesn't make but for folks who are using manure, we are proposing this alternative. So, in a nutshell, what this takes into consideration is your soil test P levels. You can see changes here. So, in Minnesota, anything greater than 22 parts per million is greater than an agronomic crop can respond to, and so it's kind of excessive. And it goes all the way up to greater than 150 parts per million. It takes into consideration if you have a buffer or not. So if you have a buffer, so this was 100-foot wide buffer along, the area of concentrated flow water body. We have one set of scoring, and without a buffer of another set of scoring. And then what it looks at next is your application rate on a crop removal basis. So if this is making sense, if you can apply phosphate and within the rotation that on paper that you're removing that phosphate through your harvesting of your alfalfa and your corn, then you're having no net impact on those soil phosphorus levels, and you couple that with sound agronomic, soil erosion control, and you go. The piece we have in here is the idea of soil and erosion. So if you're losing more than 6 tons per acre, we have to address this step first before we can score any higher. So this is all overarching cat right here. Soil erosion has to be under control. This right here is supported by these phosphorus indexes and the 720 rules. What you can see is that previously, let's say you had 100 parts per million soil test P, and you're applying manure because that was part of your, fertility program. Previously, you would be way over the phosphate recommendations and for like a 0 or a 1 or assessment tool. This gives folks the opportunity to manage those soil sinks well to that in the assessment process. So a lot of information there. I'll do an example real quick, but any questions?
This is Tim. Maybe it's not to be addressed here, but I just thought of it. So as these bulletins come out and these changes are made, how do they affect the ones that were previously done? Are they designed to blend forward, or? Yeah, they're designed to blend forward. And if we're going forward and as we change things, if the folks that have been done are certified, we're grandfathered in, so to speak, and when we're moving forward with a tool. Sorry.
So come back to our 6-year rotation, and so we have here again, we have our 6-year rotation. In the blue lines here, we have our inputs of phosphate based upon rates, and these are likely driven by nitrogen needs. So we can see when we're importing anywhere from 60 to 105 pounds on that corn crop. The brown boxes here are export, so we can see during alfalfa years when we're not applying manure, we are exporting 4 to 42 pounds depending upon our crop size every year. And then also we're exporting quite a bit. So if we add all the inputs back to all the outputs on paper, we're exporting more P than we're importing. So for this, this other producer, they would be below P removal rates. So then on this situation, depending on if they had a buffer, let's say no buffer, they would be in these 2 columns, this column or this column, and you would simply look over at their soil test P. So get a 7 or a 6, depending if they had a buffer or no buffer, and a soil test of below 75 parts per million. So, and the blue table or the blue handbook has average nutrient crop removal rates. So this is how estimation. So alfalfa exporting 12 pounds per ton of phosphate, and with corn grain, of a pound per bushel. So that's how we're getting these export calculations. So. All right, and then so the last one here, and then we'll in there. Great. Manure allocation, timing, and placement. So the other way that we've wrapped the 720 rules into this, and we'd like, again, this will be in the next bulletin, so you read all about it then and ask more questions anytime of us. But to make sure we do is that our producers are following all the applicable recommendations in regards to manure. So where you score this section, we'd like you to, if they have these sensitive features, read through the R's and make sure that they're meeting the existing requirements. This should be nothing new. This is for any permit level. If you have 1,000 animal units or 1 animal unit, make sure they are following the various setbacks in R. And this will be in the next bulletin, so you can look at that. It's also a time to show the voluntary best management practices. Some of them are tangled up into this right here, like the idea of the buffers, but some of them are above and beyond what we're presenting here, and it's just a good opportunity to highlight those. So, and familiar with the scoring. That's kind of all we got for nutrient management. I went that kind of quick, but any questions, comments, corrections?
Curious of some other people doing these. When the P is applied for 2 years for the corn and the beans, is anyone? I guess is that just throws them off 1 year. Is that a common thing people have been seeing? You know what I mean by that, Peter?
What you're asking is if it's applied in 2 years. For like in their corn year, they're applying all their P's for that rotation, right?
Yes.
Yes. It is capital P. New proposed recommendations are not applicable. So what we are saying there is, an opportunity with some of our cost share funds to make them to apply it annually. During that year, they are going to be applying twice as much P. So that's our current rule on that.
Okay.
Dennis?
Isn't that bad of an answer?
Yeah. Come on, puppy. I'll just give a shameless plug for our next webinar. Next Thursday the 1st at 9 o'clock, we will be tackling pest management, and Joe Zachman of our division, he's a pro in this stuff, is going to be here to kind of clarify that. We understand that it is a common question, so we're doing that amongst other topics. So,
just want to check here. Those of you that have this up on your screen, you see that there's a bar at the top of the screen, and if you click on participants, you will see who is all online. There is a raise your hand feature if you ever have any questions we're not paying attention to you. It looks like today that a lot of folks actually use the 800 number to call in, so that is certainly an option, as well as the system calling in to you. And certainly we'd be open to any comments about how to make the whole webinar system work better for all of us, because this is a great way to be updating you all when there are some adjustments to the bulletin or some additional information about certification or open houses, etc. It's a way that we can put that information, and then I think importantly the ability for you all to be asking questions on another. We've had successful open houses, so I want to thank each of you for the work that you did to get those put together. And I know that folks are going to be in the field very soon, and we'll be figuring out our second round of communication activities. Do they have questions about this, what comes next? I know you all are heavily engaged at this point, and we're very pleased about that. Let's see if anybody wanted to use the raise hand feature. That's how that works. So, all the pilots have been well for today. So again, those of us who are here are open to questions anytime. Just pick up the phone or send an email. Brad, anything you have to add?
Question that I forgot to ask.
Sure.
On his talking about the WASCOBs with the open inlets, that we don't score them as an open inlet if it's a designed WASCOB. If it's armor design one that might not have an orifice in the tile, can we still score that as no open inlet?
There's times where I'm going to defer to your professional judgment, Mark. If you think it's a good functional conservation practice, I guess, you know, it's removing sediment that would otherwise be going over land flow, causing erosion. If you feel right about it, go ahead and don't advise for an open intake.
Okay.
If it's a poor design thing that's overtopping and washing away, then I guess I'd be less inclined to give them the benefit. But
thank you.
Well, this is Brad, and I just offer again that we scheduled a webinar to 4 nights, so we can certainly even go up to 3:30 if you want. You do not have to.
There's a raised hand.
And I say raised hand, and we'll go to that.
Calling. I'm on the advisory board here in Whitewater, and we have a couple questions on the manure side of things. Commercial. When you look at sheets, you can apply up to 180 pounds on the manure side and only 165 on the commercial side. What difference, or why are we looking at it as a difference?
Good question. With the manure is that a lot of the nitrogen is in organic form, and it more slowly releases versus more readily available commercial fertilizer, where it's often ready to go. So our colder spring like this year, you're going to see on exclusively manure applied fields potentially a slower green up, just because that manure is still in that organic form. So I believe that's why the UM has put in kind of that with the higher rates of manure because of a form that the nitrogen is in.
Okay, one more question too, and that was kind of what we were thinking, but we want to clarify that. The other thing is, when you look at the sheets here, your corn uses up 0.9 pounds N per bushel. And when you figure it out, we've got guys in here I mean, doing 225 to 240, that 165 is never going to produce what they want to produce on their farms. And those numbers really, when you figure it out, 240 times 0.9 ends up to be over 200 pounds of N, whereas we're recommending only 165. Your comments on that?
Yeah, that's a great idea too, and it's something we, the BMPs were last updated in 2008, and the averages of an average across, trials. And so some of the new plant oil, the new hybrids, are more they're heavy nitrogen users, and they don't reflect that. And so on the BP side, they constantly need to be updated, and that process, it takes its course, and something that the folks in the agronomy department at the U of M are constantly updating. In terms of our program, we are saying that the way it's structured, that's fine. If you have to apply more in because of your soil type, of your crop genetics, that's fine. You can compensate that and manage your risk by doing well in other areas. So we don't necessarily need to get 10 out of 10 in every area. We realize it's frustrating for folks trying to, do the right thing and get a high score. But the thing about this index thing is you can kind of manage that dynamic. You can in other areas. So it's something we've been hearing from all different folks, and it's duly noted.
Oh, that's, I think, all I had today.
Brad, we're sure available for more questions on anything under the sun involving the certification program. So if you have anything you've been thinking about, you can go ahead and ask a question now. We'll hang out here, but if you don't have to stay on the line if you don't want to.
Just to get the webinars, the format's very helpful for that.
Sure. Got people on staff here. I appreciate it too.
Topics for other future webinars? Are we missing anything, or lost, or toss them right now?
Well, just to give you a sense of where we'll need information, perhaps taking advantage of this late spring weather to meet with producers, and we haven't spent as much time running this tool and crunching that, so that we're gonna probably get to that when planting starts. Part of that is we'd like to do a block of them, 12, 15, or 20, whatever, at the same time, so we're consistent with that first block. So. And that occurs, then we'll probably have quite a few questions once we generate that first chunk there.
One more question on the BMPs. You get options as far as waterways and filter strips and sort of thing. Is there guidelines that need to be followed as far as the width of those practices?
Are these existing, new, should
well, a lot of them will be probably new if they need to get up to a score, say they're not quite scoring an 8.5 or something like that. To get over the top, they need to either add a filter strip or a buffer strip or say a waterway, and that will get them over the top.
Right. New should design to meet NRCS specs.
Okay, so looking at NRCS widths then.
think they should do that. If they're existing out there, then that's really where, you need the fire needs to go to the field and at least certify that it is functioning. Waterways have lost their widths over the years, or, people nose on them when they shouldn't, and then the water starts running down the end rows. But those are items for checking in the field, but functional on the field, I guess that's the main thing.
Yes, just another question on that is I'm in the process of redoing some of my waterways, and we'll go through NRCS, just kind of do them on my own. And they're looking at a whole lot different scenario than's actually there right now. So how does a guy go about that and being certified or get certified? I mean, now I've got it's about 20 foot wide, but I don't think it's been replaced in years. I'm just kind of taking over my father-in-law's farm here, and just go ahead and repair them. But I think as long as I'm doing them, I want to go in and redo them so everything is running properly. So go about that. I know they're calling for a pretty wide waterway, wider than what's actually in there. So just kind of wondering what the thoughts are on that and how that would affect our decisions on this.
Okay. I would defer to planning. That's on their engineering standards, and that should be what's needed in landscape if that's what their hydrology is showing. And if you go on your own, you can certainly have your own. You don't need to accept kind of cost share, and they can certainly do CTA designs for you. But hopefully, you could just follow a design that comes from their engineering.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Because I think what Bill's saying is they generally design for a 24 storm, a 25 year, and that's kind of how they base their minimum size on, or whatever criteria is. So.
Right. That it would be just for those 10-year farms. So.
What county are you in again?
County.
So, Mark. Yeah.
Mark Rowe.
You can talk to them if you don't want to have that much width. They can design for an out-of-bank flow. So.
Yeah, I kind of talked about a little bit here. I have done. Mark, I'm going through the tool with him quite a little just because I'm on that advisory board. I wanted to know exactly how it operated, and he invited me to listen in today. So this is very helpful. So we will work closely with him and talk with him, and we'll get her set up right. So.
All right.
You get deeper landscapes, it can be harder to do an out-of-bank flow design. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're actually the opposite way. They're going to be really flat, and that's what the cost comes in. It's harder to actually make these flatter than it is to actually make them deeper. So,
sure.
Yeah, it's a little bit crazy, but it turned out we're putting in some pretty expensive waterways if we went that route. So, we're
that's usually where you get into the out-of-bank flows if you get really flat. That's the hardest, challenging time to design a waterway is when it's flat.
Yeah. No, the construction guys don't like them. They said it's so hard. They got much equipment that they need just to make it, half foot deep and 20 foot wide. It's more difficult than going, 10-to-1 slope. They can just about eyeball and do, but these are pretty difficult. So.
Use that example, Glenn, just kind of generically, just to note though, if you were doing a waterway or anything else like that, their case maybe tune and went up, you'll be able to get certified on the commitment that you're going to do that before it's actually done. But in the case of not having an equip contract or something that's setting some terms on you, we would ask, in your case, Mark, to note in his provide time to get that work done, that then we would have to come back and, or Mark would have to come back and verify. So, out there, the length of time that you need, a couple seasons or whatever, depending upon the circumstances that you and Mark can agree upon. But you don't have any good contract to do it. It's great farmers to undertake things themselves they want, but we'll just need to have recorded on a situation like that.
Okay. Yep.
But the good news is it won't hold up your certification. If you're making the commitment, we take on your word, and we'll go ahead and give you the certification starting the year you're done with the assessment process.
That sounds good. Thank you.
There was something that I was kind of thinking about. It goes back to those field physical factors. I just want to make sure everybody's knowing to do it. It's nothing that's come up before, but when you get into dual hydrology designations, like a BD or CD soil, if those are drained, go ahead and use that lesser designation. So, especially if you get down to the pothole country, I know a lot of that stuff's BD. Go ahead and use the if it's got pattern drainage. Anything else?
Well, as you said, you can get a hold of us anytime. Email, call us, just get in touch with us anytime. We can't thank you enough for the work that you're doing out there on our behalf, and it doesn't happen if you're not there. So thanks, and we just, are here to provide any assistance we can at any time. And thanks for your time today. Any last thoughts? Otherwise, we'll be signing off right now.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.